The silver tray gleamed under the morning light as it passed through the palace corridor. On it sat a delicate porcelain plate, covered with a gold-trimmed dome. Inside was something that should never have been there. Officer James Reeves had stood guard at Buckingham Palace for nearly 12 years. He knew every hallway, every protocol, every face. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something felt wrong. The tray being carried toward the Princess of Wales's private quarters looked ordinary enough. The servant carrying it wore the proper uniform. But James noticed the way her hands trembled slightly, the way her eyes darted left and right as she walked. He had learned long ago. To trust his instincts. Kate Middleton was scheduled to have breakfast in her study that morning. She had been working tirelessly on her early childhood development project, often skipping meals or eating while reviewing documents. The palace staff knew her routine well. Too well, perhaps. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss these incredible true tales from behind palace walls. James watched the servant approach the study door. His pulse quickened. There was something in the way she moved, something rehearsed, like an actor who had practiced their lines too many times. He stepped forward, his boots clicking softly on the marble floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. The servant stopped. She turned slowly, and James saw it then, a flash of panic in her eyes before she forced a smile. "Yes, officer." Her voice was tight. "I need to inspect the tray. But, sir, the princess is waiting for her breakfast." "It's been approved by—" "I need to inspect the tray," James repeated. His hand rested on his belt, not threatening, but present. The servant's face went pale. For a moment, neither of them moved. The corridor was silent, except for the distant ticking of an antique clock. Then, from behind them, came the sharp click of heels on marble. Both turned to see a figure approaching from the west wing. The morning light caught her pearls first, then the elegant line of her navy dress. It was Queen Consort Camilla. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on the tray. "Is there a problem?" Camilla's voice cut through the silence like a blade. James felt the weight of the moment. He was just a guard. She was royalty. But his duty was clear, and something in his gut screamed danger. The servant looked between them, her breathing shallow. "I was just about to inspect the princess's breakfast, Your Majesty," James said carefully. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. "That won't be necessary. The meal has already been." "With respect, ma'am, palace protocol requires random inspections." James kept his tone professional, but he didn't move, especially for meals delivered to senior royals. The air grew thick with tension. Camilla's jaw tightened. The servant's hands shook harder now, the tray beginning to rattle softly. Something was very wrong here, and James knew that whatever was under that gold dome could change everything. He reached for the tray, and in that instant, the servant's face crumbled. She looked at Camilla with pleading eyes, then back at James. And in that single glance, James understood this was not just about breakfast. This was about power, rivalry, and something far more dangerous hidden beneath royal courtesy. James lifted the gold dome slowly. The smell hit him first, buttery, unmistakable. Shellfish, lobster, to be precise, arranged beautifully with drawn butter and herbs. It looked like a meal from a five-star restaurant, but James knew something most people didn't. Kate Middleton had a severe shellfish allergy. It was in her medical file, known only to senior staff and security. And they were in a private wing of the palace, far from immediate medical help. His blood ran cold. "This is shellfish," James said quietly, his eyes moving from the plate to the servant, then to Camilla. The servant's face drained of all color. She took a step back, nearly dropping the tray. I was told it was chicken." "The order said chicken with herbs." "I swear, I didn't know who gave you the order," James demanded. The servant's eyes darted to Camilla, then away, as if she had revealed too much in that single glance. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Fear had stolen her voice. Camilla stepped forward, her composure returning like armor sliding into place. "This is clearly a mix-up in the kitchen. A terrible mistake, but nothing more. I'll have the chef reprimanded immediately." But James wasn't buying it. He had seen too many things in his years at the palace, heard too many whispers. The tension between Camilla and Kate was no secret among the staff. Kate's rising popularity with the public had created friction, as Camilla had worked for years too. Build her own image, and Kate's natural grace and warmth seemed to eclipse it effortlessly. A mix-up, James said carefully. The princess's allergy is clearly marked in her dietary file. Every kitchen staff member knows it. Every meal is double-checked. Camilla's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Are you questioning me, officer? The corridor seemed to shrink around them. This was the moment where James had to choose follow the rules and potentially accuse a member of the royal family of something unthinkable or step back and let it go. But if he let it go and something happened to Kate, he would never forgive himself. I'm following protocol, Your Majesty, James said firmly. This tray was headed to the Princess of Wales with a substance that could kill her. I need to know how it got here. The servant began to cry softly. Please, I have children. I was just following orders. I thought it was a special request. Whose orders? Shh, James pressed. Before the servant could answer, a door opened down the hall. Kate Middleton stepped out of her study, elegant in a cream blouse and tailored pants, her expression curious. She had heard voices. James felt panic surge through him if she had eaten that meal without question, assuming it was safe. Is everything all right? Kate asked, walking toward them with that calm grace she was known for. Camilla's face transformed instantly into a warm smile. Catherine, darling, just a small confusion with your breakfast. Nothing to worry about. But Kate's eyes were sharp. She looked at the tray and the servant shaking hands, at James's tense posture, at Camilla's too-perfect smile. She had grown. Up in this world long enough to recognize when something was wrong. What kind of confusion? Kate asked, her voice gentle but firm. James met her eyes. This was the moment. He could protect his career or he could protect her life. There was no middle ground, Your Highness, he said quietly. There's shellfish on that tray. It was about to be served to you. Kate's face went still. The blood drained from her cheeks. She understood immediately what that meant, not just the medical danger, but the deeper, darker implication. Someone had tried to hurt her. And that? Someone had access to the palace, to her private quarters, to her daily routine. Her eyes moved slowly to Camilla, and in that look everything changed. The silence in the corridor was suffocating. Kate stood frozen, her mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just negligence. This was calculated. Someone knew exactly what would happen if she ate that meal. I see, Kate said softly, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. She looked at the crying servant. What's your name? Maria, Your Highness, the woman stammered. Maria, how long have you worked here? 3 months, ma'am. 3 months. New staff. Easier to manipulate, easier to frighten. Kate's heart ached for the woman, but her mind was already connecting pieces. She turned to James, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, Officer Reeves. You may have just saved my life. Camilla's composure cracked slightly. Catherine, surely you don't think this is absurd. It's obviously a kitchen error. These things happen in large households. Kate wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking at James. I want a full investigation. I want to know who ordered this meal, who prepared it, and who signed off on it. Every step documented. Of course, Your Highness, James said, relief flooding through him. She believed him. More than that, she was taking action. Camilla's voice rose slightly, the first hint of desperation creeping in. Catherine, think about what you're suggesting. The scandal? This could create the scandal? Kate's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. Camilla, if Officer Reeves hadn't stopped this tray, I could be dying right now. Scandal is the least of my concerns. Maria sobbed harder, sinking against the wall. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. She said she stopped herself, hand flying to her mouth. Who said? Kate asked gently, moving closer to the terrified woman. Maria, you're not in trouble. But I need to know the truth. Maria looked at Camilla with fear-filled eyes, then back at Kate. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She had children to feed, a job she desperately needed. But she had also nearly been an accomplice to something terrible. She told me, Maria whispered, that you had specifically requested lobster, that your allergy information was outdated, that you'd been eating shellfish privately for months, and the files hadn't been updated yet. Kate's expression didn't change, but inside, her world tilted. Someone had lied to this woman, had manipulated her deliberately, and there was only one person standing here who would benefit from Kate's absence. Who told you this, Maria? Kate asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Maria could answer, Camila interrupted sharply. This is ridiculous. I won't stand here and be implicated in some conspiracy theory. A kitchen worker made an error. That's all this is. But James stepped forward, his voice clear and official. Your Majesty, with respect, I need to ask, were you aware this meal was being delivered to the princess? Camilla's eyes went cold. I am not accustomed to being interrogated by palace staff. Answer the question, please, Kate said quietly. Her tone was no longer gentle. It was the voice of a future queen. The corridor felt like a courtroom now. Camila stood alone on one side, Kate and James on the other, with Maria crumpled between them. The antique clock ticked in the distance, each second stretching impossibly long. I may have mentioned to the kitchen that Catherine enjoyed lobster, Camila said carefully. I must have been mistaken. Perhaps I confused her with someone else, but Kate knew. She knew in the way Camilla's eyes wouldn't meet hers. She knew in the timing, in the deliberate nature of the mistake. She knew because this wasn't the first time Camila had tried to undermine her, just the first time it had been this dangerous. You told them I liked lobster, Kate said slowly. Knowing I'm deathly allergic to it, I made a mistake, Catherine. Nothing more. But the lie hung in the air between them, visible to everyone. Maria's sobs were the only sound now, her guilt and fear pouring out in broken gasps. She had been a pawn in something much bigger than herself. Kate straightened her shoulders. She thought of her children, of William, of all the people who depended on her. This couldn't be swept under the rug. Not this time. Officer Reeves, please escort Maria somewhere she can rest and give a full statement. I want security footage pulled from the kitchen and this hallway for the past 48 hours. Then she turned to Camila, and her voice dropped to something both quiet and unmovable. And you and I need to speak with the king. King Charles sat in his private study, the weight of the crown feeling heavier than usual. He had ruled for less than 2 years, still finding his footing after decades of waiting. The last thing he needed was a crisis within his own family. But as Kate and Camila stood before him, the tension between them electric. He knew this was no small matter. Kate spoke first, her voice measured and clear. She laid out the facts without emotion, the shellfish, her allergy, the servant's testimony, his admission. She didn't accuse directly, but the implication was unmistakable. Charles listened in growing horror, his face paling with each detail. Camila stood rigid, her defenses up. Charles, this is being blown entirely out of proportion. It was a simple miscommunication, a miscommunication that could have killed her. Charles said quietly, his voice heavy with something between anger and grief. He looked at his wife, and for the first time, Kate saw genuine conflict in his eyes. This was the woman he loved, the woman he had fought for decades to marry. But this was also his son's wife, his grandchildren's mother, the future of the monarchy. I would never intentionally harm anyone, Camila said, her voice breaking slightly. Catherine, you must believe me. I may have made a terrible error in judgment, but did you or did you not tell the kitchen staff that I enjoyed lobster? Kate asked directly. Camilla's silence was answer enough. Charles stood, walking to the window. Outside, tourists gathered at the palace gates, unaware of the drama unfolding inside. He thought of his mother, Elizabeth, and how she had navigated far worse scandals with grace and discretion. But this was different. This was attempted harm, whether intentional or through reckless disregard. The servant Maria, Charles said, still facing the window. What did she say exactly? Kate pulled out her phone, where she had recorded Maria's statement with permission. She played it. Maria's trembling voice filled the room. The queen consort called me personally 2 days ago. She said the princess had developed a taste for shellfish recently, and her medical files were outdated. She said it would be a lovely surprise for her breakfast on Tuesday. She was very specific about the timing and the dish. She said not to mention it to anyone because it was meant to be a thoughtful gesture. The recording ended. The silence that followed was crushing. Camilla's face crumbled. I didn't think I mean. I thought perhaps the allergy wasn't as severe as documented. People outgrow allergies. I've read about it. I genuinely believed you read about it. Kate's voice was sharp now, the composure finally cracking. So you knew about my allergy? You knew it was documented. And instead of asking me, or asking my doctor, or checking with William, you decided on your own that it probably wasn't serious anymore, and orchestrated a surprise meal that could have killed me. I was trying to help you expand your diet. You're always so restrictive because I could die. Kate's voice rose, then fell again as she fought for control. Camila, I have 3 children. I have duties. I have a life. And you gambled with all of it because of what? Because you wanted to prove something? Because you resented me? The truth of it hung in the air. Charles turned from the window, his face aged by the weight of understanding. He had seen the jealousy, the small comments, the way Camilla's mood soured when Kate received praise. He had ignored it, hoping it would pass. But this had gone too far. Camila, he said slowly, I need you to be completely honest with me. Was there any part of you that hoped this would cause problems for Catherine? It was the question that needed asking, the one that would define everything. Camilla's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her husband, at Kate, and something inside her seemed to break. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I was thinking. She's so perfect, so beloved. Everywhere she goes, people light up. And I've spent years trying to earn a fraction of that affection. I thought if she was ... indisposed. For a while, maybe people would remember that I'm here too, that I matter too. The confession hit like a physical blow. Charles sank back into his chair, looking suddenly old. Kate felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. This woman, who had everything, was still so insecure that she would risk someone's life for a moment of relevance. You matter, Kate said quietly, surprising everyone, including herself. You're the queen consort. You have a platform, responsibilities, influence. But trying to hurt me doesn't elevate you. It just makes you... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Charles stood again, his decision made. Camilla, you will issue a private apology to Catherine. You will undergo a full review by palace security and surrender access to any staff scheduling or meal planning. You will also speak with a therapist about these feelings. This is non-negotiable. Charles, if you refuse, he continued, his voice firm, I will have no choice but to ask you to step back from public duties indefinitely. The monarchy cannot survive this kind of scandal. Camilla's tears spilled over. She nodded, defeated. But as she left the room, she cast one last look at Catondinet. Kate saw something that chilled her. Not remorse, not apology, but resentment that still burned, possibly brighter than before. Officer James Reeves stood outside the king's study, his back straight, his mind racing. Through the heavy oak door, he could hear muffled voices, though not the words. He had done his duty, followed protocol, trusted his instincts, but he also knew that sometimes doing the right thing in a place like this came with consequences. When the door finally opened, Camilla emerged first, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't look at James as she passed, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet corridor. Kate appeared next, pausing when she saw him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Thank you, she said simply. You saved my life today, Officer Reeves. I won't forget that. James nodded, maintaining his professional demeanor, but inside, relief flooded through him. Just doing my job, Your Highness. It was more than that. You risked your position by questioning her. Many people wouldn't have had that courage. She hesitated, then added, I'm going to make sure you're properly recognized for this. Quietly, but meaningfully. Before James could respond, Kate was gone, moving down the corridor with the same grace she always carried. Though he could see the weight of the morning in her shoulders, Charles appeared last, looking exhausted. "Officer Reeves," the king said a word. James's heart sank. This was it. The moment where he would be quietly reassigned, sent somewhere far from the palace. His career effectively ended for daring to challenge royalty. He followed Charles back into the study, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. "Sit," Charles said. Gesturing to a chair, James sat ramrod straight, waiting for the blow. But Charles surprised him. "You did something today that very few people in your position would have done. You followed your instincts when it would have been easier to look away. You protected someone who needed protecting, regardless of the personal cost. That kind of integrity is rare." James blinked, confused. "Sir, I'm not blind to the difficulties you'll face after this. There will be people in this household who resent what you did, who see you as a troublemaker. Camilla's allies, what few remain after today, will make things uncomfortable for you." Charles leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But you'll have my protection. And Catherine's? That counts for something." "I appreciate that, Your Majesty. I was just following protocol." "Yes, I know. But we both know it was more than that. You saw something wrong, and you acted. The monarchy needs more people like you, not fewer. People who will do the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Charles stood, moving to a cabinet. He pulled out a crystal decanter and 2 glasses, pouring amber liquid into both. He handed one to James, who took it with uncertain hands. Kings didn't share drinks with palace guards. "To integrity," Charles said, raising his glass. James raised his own, the crystal catching the morning light. "To duty." They drank in silence, and in that moment, James understood that something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He was a man who had stood between danger and a princess, who had questioned power and been proven right. That would follow him, for good and ill, for the rest of his career. After James left, Charles sat alone in his study, the weight of the morning crushing down on him. He loved Camilla. He had fought for decades to marry her, weathered public scorn, family disapproval, and his own guilt. But love didn't excuse what had happened today. Love didn't make attempted harm acceptable. He picked up his phone and dialed William's private number. His son deserved to know what had happened, what had almost happened to his wife. The conversation would be difficult. William's temper, when roused, was formidable, but the truth couldn't be hidden, not from him. "Father." William's voice came through, confused by the unexpected call. "William, I need you to come to the palace. There's been an incident. Kate is fine, but there's something you need to know. Something about Camilla." The silence on the other end was heavy with dread. Charles could picture his son's face hardening, preparing for battle. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Charles hung up and stared out the window again. Somewhere in the palace, Camilla was likely in their private quarters, crying or raging or both. Somewhere else, Kate was probably calling her own family, processing the shock and betrayal. And throughout the building, staff members were beginning to whisper, the story spreading like wildfire despite attempts at containment. The monarchy had survived scandals before. Affairs, divorces, deaths, and disasters. But this felt different. This was family turning on family, not out of passion or politics, but out of petty jealousy and dangerous insecurity. This was the kind of wound that festered if not properly treated, and Charles knew. Sitting there in his study with the morning sun streaming through ancient windows, that nothing in the palace would ever quite be the same. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to fully repair, and the cracks that had formed today would echo through the halls of power for years to come. Outside, life continued normally. Tourists took photos. Guards changed shifts. The city of London hummed with its usual energy. But inside the palace walls, something had fundamentally changed, and everyone who knew the truth could feel it. 3 weeks later, the palace had settled into an uneasy new normal. The official story leaked carefully to trusted journalists. was that there had been a serious breach of protocol regarding dietary safety that had been swiftly addressed. No names were mentioned, but those who paid attention could read between the lines. Camilla's public appearances had been quietly reduced. She attended only mandatory state functions, and even then she and Kate were never photographed together. The warmth that had once existed between them, fragile though it was, had completely evaporated. At family gatherings, they spoke only when necessary. Their words polite but hollow. Maria, the servant, who had unwittingly become part of the scheme, had been relocated to a different position with a glowing reference and a raise. Kate had insisted on it, recognizing the woman as another victim rather than a villain. Maria sent her a thank-you note, handwritten and tear-stained, expressing gratitude for the mercy shown to her and her family. Officer James Reeves found himself in an unexpected position. He had been commended privately by both Charles and Kate, and his reputation among the security staff had grown considerably. Some saw him as a hero. Others saw him as a troublemaker who had disrupted the careful balance of palace politics. He learned to navigate both perceptions, keeping his head down and his instincts sharp. But the real changes were happening beneath the surface. In the quiet conversations and careful maneuvers of royal life, William had been furious when he learned the truth. The argument between him and his father had been heard throughout the private quarters, voices raised in ways that were almost never permitted. He had demanded Camilla be removed entirely from Palace's life, exiled from family functions, stripped of her titles. Charles had refused, defending his wife while acknowledging her terrible judgment. The compromise had been painful for everyone. Camilla would remain queen consort in title, but her influence would be severely limited. She would have no involvement in planning, staffing, or any decisions that affected Kate or her children. She would be watched always, by people whose loyalty was to the crown first, and to her, not at all. For Kate, the betrayal cut deeper than she let on publicly. She had tried with Camilla, truly tried, to build something resembling family. She had endured the comparisons, the criticisms, the subtle undermining, always with grace and patience. But knowing that someone had been willing to gamble with her life, possibly even hoping for her, death changed something fundamental inside her. She became more guarded, more careful about who she trusted. But she also became stronger, more willing to speak up when something felt wrong. The woman who had once worried about causing trouble was now someone who understood that sometimes trouble was necessary to protect what mattered. One morning, almost a month after the incident, Kate found James on duty near the staterooms. She approached quietly, waiting until he noticed her and stood at attention. "Walk with me," she asked. They walked through the gallery, surrounded by centuries of portraits watching them with painted eyes. Kate spoke softly, her words meant only for him. "I've been thinking about that morning," she said, "about how easily it could have gone differently. If you had been just a few minutes earlier or later, if you had ignored your instincts, if you had decided it wasn't your place to question things." She paused by a window overlooking the gardens. "My children would have lost their mother. William would have lost his wife. The country would have lost someone who loves them and wants to serve them. Your Highness, let me finish." She turned to him, and he saw the emotion she rarely let show. "You saved me, James. Not just my life, but my ability to be there for everyone who needs me. And I wanted you to know that I'll never forget that. Neither will William. If you ever need anything, ever find yourself in trouble, you come to us. You have my word." James felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." Kate smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in weeks. "And James, trust your instincts. They're good ones." As she walked away, James stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by centuries of history. He thought about all the moments captured in these paintings, coronations, wars, triumphs, and scandals. The monarchy had survived all of it, evolved through all of it. And somehow, despite everything, it would survive this too. In her private quarters, Camilla sat by a window, watching the gardens below. She had lost so much in one moment of jealous recklessness. Her relationship with Charles was strained, perhaps irreparably. Her stepson barely spoke to her. Her public image, which she had worked years to build, was now tainted by whispered speculation. But worst of all was the knowledge of what she had been willing to do. In the quiet moments when she was honest with herself, she knew the truth part of her had hoped the lobster would make Kate sick, force her to withdraw from public life for a while, create space for Camila to shine. She had told herself it was just a small test of how serious the allergy really was. But deep down, she knew better. The guilt was a living thing inside her, growing heavier each day. She had become the villain in her own story, and there was no way to rewrite that ending. The palace continued its rhythms, ancient and unchanging on the surface, constantly evolving underneath. Secrets were kept, and stories were managed. Life went on, because it always did. But for those who had been there that Tuesday morning, James with his sharp instincts, Kate with her narrow escape, Maria with her innocent participation, Camila with her terrible choice, and Charles with his impossible position, nothing would ever quite be the same. The crown continued to shine, as it always had. But everyone who wore it or protected it or served it knew now more clearly than ever that beneath the glitter and ceremony, they were all just human, fallible, complex, capable of both remarkable courage and devastating mistakes. And sometimes, the difference between tragedy and survival came down to one person choosing to pay attention, to ask questions, to trust that something was wrong even when everyone else wanted to look away. Sometimes it came down to a guard who refused to ignore what his gut was telling him. Even when it would have been so much easier to just let the tray pass by,